But that hope was dashed the moment Thomas barked at Daniels. "Get him." The words were like a signal, and suddenly, the officers were closing in around Marcus. One of them grabbed his arm, yanking him roughly. It was enough to snap the last of Marcus's restraint. He spun, using the movement to break free, his military instincts coming alive. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. But he moved with the precision of someone who had learned to defend himself in the worst possible situations. It wasn't a fight. Not yet. But it was clear things were about to turn violent. The tension was a live wire, crackling in the air. Daniels hesitated, looking again at his partner, unsure. But Thomas's voice sliced through the confusion. "Don't let him get away. We don't back down, you hear me?" Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom anymore. This was bigger than that. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his every sense heightened. He wasn't sure how far this would go, but one thing was certain. This was the point of no return. He couldn't walk away from this fight. Not anymore. Not when everything he had ever feared seemed to be rising up before him. The younger officer, Daniels, was still frozen. His eyes met Marcus's one last time, and for just a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would he stand with his partner, or would he see this for what it was? A man, trying to survive in a world that was determined to break him. The answer hung in the air, just out of reach, as the officers began to close in once again. Just as the officers inched closer, preparing to forcefully subdue Marcus, the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the tension. It was a momentary pause, but it changed everything. The younger officer, Daniels, hesitated again, looking over his shoulder, his face betraying confusion. The sirens grew louder, closer, and then a car screeched to a halt just down the block. Marcus's eyes flicked to the approaching vehicle, his pulse quickening. Who else could be showing up now? He wasn't sure if this was an opportunity or another threat, but in that moment, the sudden arrival shifted the balance. From the car stepped another officer, but not one of the usual squad. This man was older, dressed in plain clothes, his posture rigid and authoritative. He moved swiftly, his eyes scanning the scene, catching the tension in the air. As he approached, the officers around Marcus straightened, almost instinctively. Thomas seemed rattled, his voice lowered to a murmur as he spoke to the newcomer, clearly not expecting anyone else to intervene. Marcus could feel the shift in the air. The new officer's presence wasn't comforting, it was ominous. Something about the way he moved, the cold look in his eyes, made it clear that this wasn't just a routine arrival. The officer's gaze locked onto Marcus for a moment, and there was a flicker of recognition, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a brief pause as if he was trying to place where he had seen Marcus before. The crowd around them seemed to shrink, the tension palpable. "What's going on here?" the plainclothes officer asked, his voice clipped, betraying a level of authority that Marcus hadn't expected. Before Thomas could respond, Daniels spoke up, his voice shaky. "We've got a situation here, sir. This guy's being difficult." The newcomer's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer to Marcus. There was something off about the way he regarded him, something too familiar. Marcus could feel his stomach twist. The officer's gaze lingered on him for a moment too long, and it was then that Marcus realized this wasn't just some random officer. This was someone he recognized, someone from his past, someone who had served with him during his time in the military. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What was this man doing here? Why was he stepping in now? Had he been watching? Was he part of the system, or was this a twisted coincidence? The plot was thickening, and Marcus could feel the ground beneath him shifting. The stakes had just been raised higher than he ever imagined. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Just as he opened his mouth to respond, Jansen's phone buzzed. He looked down, his expression darkening, then glanced back at Marcus with a look of regret. "Don't trust anyone here," Jansen said, his words sending a chill down Marcus's spine. "Not even me." With that, Jansen walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the street, surrounded by silence. The officers had vanished, but the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. Marcus's world had just shifted, and he was left standing at the edge, unsure of where to go next. The truth was, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the weight of Jansen's words settling in. The street was empty now, but the questions were still buzzing in his mind. What was Jansen really involved in? Why had he come back into Marcus's life now, of all times? He felt the old military instincts stirring inside him, the need to figure it out, to get to the bottom of this. But for the first time in years, he wasn't sure who he could trust. As Marcus turned and walked away, the sound of sirens faded into the distance, but something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just about a corrupt system anymore. It was about a deeper, more dangerous game. He'd survived the streets, he'd survived war, but this was something different. What Jansen had said lingered, a warning. And Marcus knew one thing for sure: this fight was far from over. The road ahead would be long, but he wasn't backing down now, not ever again.